I got involved in Connecticut history and Wilton history through the church, because in the early 70s, it's about the time they found that safe full of old records, and nobody had really studied them. And so I said, well, we should list it alphabetically. By then we had computers. You know, in the 60s, we didn't have computers. In the 70s, they were not so great, but there were computers. And so I made a computerized list of all the old records of the church and submitted it to the Connecticut Ancestry publication. They published it. Anyhow, I got involved through the church history records, and that led me to the town history records.
As you can see, this is a historic building, but it's well used every day. It's not a museum. It's we use it and we love it and we live in it.
And this is also
You're doing a wonderful job, Bob, as you always do.
Like Lincoln and his wife, but I don't think it is. Well, the cornerstone was placed in 1790, and the building was built in 1790. And we have ample proof of that. It used to face the highway because the front of the building, long time ago, faced the highway before they built the addition, and then they had to swing the cornerstone around and have a new front that added 15 feet to the building. And you can see by the marks in the clapboard along here that that's the original clapboard. They just added 15 feet to it. Millstone is one of many that were throughout Wilton and in all the local grist mills. We don't know which quarry it came from because we had several quarries at the time. It's probably right down the hill where the Merwin Mill used to stand. It started out as the Hickok's Mill. It was one of the very first mills in Wilton in the 1720, 1730 period, about the time that Wilton Parish was formed in 1726. And there are pieces of millstones all over town. We just happened to get this one for the church. Hasn't been in this position for very long. I think I remember when they moved it up here. But the cornerstone has been there since 1790. We're sure about that. Let's walk around a bit to the front and the other side. Well, it was added on in 1844 to when they built that false Greek front. So it really just added a different look to the front of the church. And it had the advantage of giving them an entry area, so you didn't go straight into the sanctuary. And you had, well, the new stairs up to the balcony, and you had another access to the bell tower. Bell tower had been here almost from the beginning. I don't think it was 1790, but shortly after. In fact, there's a wonderful book, The Architecture of All the Old Churches in Connecticut by J. Frederick Kelly. It's a 2-volume thing. It's in the history room in the library. This man did exhaustive research in the 1930s, published his book in the 1940s. In fact, he's the one that wrote a letter to the church in 1944. It says, your church is going to collapse because those beams are slipping off the posts. And so it was 30 years before they did anything about it. A few at a time can get up into the attic.
Everyone just watch your head on this beam here,
Yeah.
walking up these stairs.
How many, should we only have 3 or 4 people at a time go through
Everybody
the door? Everybody can come up?
Oh, no, you probably can get 10 people at a time.
I mean, they can't fit up the stairway at one time, but
No.
we can all on the landing up here, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you probably get 10 people at a time up here.
Yeah, I'm going up this way since I was there. You go. Watch your head.
Yes, thank you.
Make sure. It's a solid piece of wood. Just watch your head on this.
Thank you.
about creepy, huh?
Oh, this is the cord for the bell, huh?
Yeah.
What kind of wood is this?
This I think is oak.
No, this on the floor?
Oh, I don't know.
Chestnut maybe?
Might be. There was a lot of chestnut used, of course, until the chestnut trees.
Yeah.
They all died about 1900, 1910. Okay.
Come in further.
Yeah, come on in. If you get back here somewhere, you can look down and you can see the curved beams that formed the original ceiling before those cross braces were put in. Those curved beams.
So the ceiling was right up against those?
Yeah, the ceiling was right up against those curved beams, all the way back through there, at about this height, until 1844. And the only attic at that time was the little space up above. First of all, is the structural change, where they changed the curved ceiling to a flat ceiling, caused architectural problems that showed up many years later. And then they, at that time, had some fancy faux painting on the front wall behind the pulpit. Faux meaning you thought you were looking into a depth, and you really weren't, because it was flat on a wall. And Pam has some pictures that showed how that used to look in the 1880s. They also, at that time, had pews in the center and two aisles, one on either side, and then pews against the walls. And it stood that way for many years. The original pews dated from about 1844. Many of these date from 1844. But when they redid it again 100 years later in the 1940s, they created the center aisle and then took the short pews and put them together to make long pews. And that's come every other row has what looks like two short pieces put together, which is what it is. Now, of course, it's all been filled up with vents. And
There we go. Oh, thank you.
everybody up here?
Everybody's up who wants to be up.
Okay, some people chicken out. And then, if you look through that hole in the wall back there, it shows there was a lot of waste space when they built this. We're in the addition part that was built in 1844. And there's just empty space down through there. In fact, there are a couple of places here where a panel in the floor lifts up, and they hid things down in there. They hid things down underneath,
Silver once there?
under the floor.
Did they find some silver?
This, of course, will ring the bell. I don't think we'll do it yet.
Wasn't there? Didn't they find silver just under the floor?
The church had hid the silver under the floor, under one of these boards, and there was, as I said, there was a panel somewhere that lifted up, and some years ago they hid silver down underneath, precious
I
silver.
remember
Yeah.
hearing about it.
Yeah.
Why were they, who was hiding silver?
Well, for safety.
Yeah, but I mean, the church had silver?
Oh yeah, we had a lot of silver
Silver platters.
platters.
Oh,
And in fact, in the middle 70s, we had a big robbery. Somebody broke in and stole stuff out of the cabinet right in the main sanctuary in the back, one of those, the glass cabinet over against the
Okay.
wall in the corner. They stole a lot of stuff. Now, to get up to the bell, there's a nice little stairway there.
So we gotta go that way.
And whoever wants to go to the bell, we're gonna have a guide. Who's the guide to the bell?
I was going to
Go
put
ahead.
this to brace myself.
I've been there a few times. I don't want to go up. And it's perfectly safe. And in fact, you can get out onto the balcony up there,
I'm not going to.
which is a lot of fun.
But I am super light.
Yeah, you could go, I'm sure. And you can get out onto that balcony. Just don't hit your head on the bell. I won't try to go in there, but on the wall, if you go in like 3 or 4 people at a time, and on the wall back there, you'll see a section that was not painted over. To the left up there on the wall. Yeah. And the reason it wasn't painted over is there are a lot of names on it. And one time when they decided to repaint up here, I went in and said, "What are these names on the wall?" It's so with some difficulty, I transcribed all the names that were on that wall and typed up the list, which I think Pam is going to print up. It turns out it's a list of burials in the Hillside Cemetery from 1848 to 1856. The custodian at the time, let me get out of here and let others look. The custodian at the time kept a record of the burials of church members and wrote it up on the wall in the back of the organ closet. So you can take a look at that, and then we'll go upstairs.
Seems like an odd place to keep a list.
Yeah, well, I guess he had a pencil and no other place to write it. We won't bring it while you're there.
Or out should go. So this is how you ring the bell?
Yeah, but don't do it while they're up there, because
I'm not.
you might hit somebody on the head.
So like, you're saying like every time somebody like comes up here and rings the
Yeah,
bell?
that's right. Every Sunday, somebody comes and rings it.
Oh, so that's how it's
Is it for everybody up there?
Not really.
Okay.
But you can work your way up
Okay.
and pass.
I wasn't sure if there was a limit to.
Pass people on the landing.
First, Karen?
We're going to go through Pilgrim Hall, and I'll tell you about it. After the war, Wilton was growing by leaps and bounds. It had been pretty much a farm town up until World War II. And after World War II, the soldiers came back, got married, wanted the home of their own, didn't want to work on the farm, found business jobs in Norwalk or Danbury or elsewhere. And the farmers in Wilton were actually having a hard time. We interviewed Everett Hurlbut, old timer on Hurlbut Street and Sturgis Ridge. And we did that as part of an interview that we did in 2002 for the 200th anniversary of Wilton's independence from Norwalk in 1802. We used to be part of Norwalk until 1802. But Everett Hurlbut said that farmers couldn't get farm workers after the war. What were we to do? He said, we sold the land. And so they all sold the land, starting in South Wilton, working their way up all the way through Wilton. The farmers, one by one, sold the land, and hundreds of houses were built, bringing hundreds of kids to the schools and to the Sunday schools. So by 1952, the church was bulging with kids. And this is part of the solution to that. This was designed by Nelson Breed, a local architect of some reputation, and built in 1952. We have pictures of the dedication. Some people are around who remember that period of time. Nia Martin, I know, remembers that period of time. And there were new classrooms, many classrooms for kids to go to Sunday school. Sure. Do we have a picture of it up there? Yeah. Yeah, Karen's pointing out what used to be here before Pilgrim Hall is now the Wilton Play Shop. And in '52, when they built this building, they had to get rid of that one. So they jacked it up, had it on blocks and rollers, and they moved it around out of the way of the new construction. And they weren't quite sure what to do with it. But Charles Dana, who owned a lot of the land behind us, stepped up and said he would take it onto his property down across Comstock Brook and attach it to one of his old barns. And so that is now the Wilton Play Shop. This building plus the barn that belonged to Charles Dana. In fact, the history of this building was built in 1875 or thereabouts, this play shop building, by a man named Lockwood Ferris, who was the local carpenter at the time.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
what was that building before it was attached to the playhouse? What
It was
that
the parish house like this, a place you could have parties and dinners and some Sunday school classes.
building? And it moved when? What time?
1952. Actually, I think they probably moved it in 51 because this building was constructed in 52. But for a while, it sat around on the backside of the church because they were looking for a home for it. And that's when Charles Dana stepped forward and said, move it down to my place and I'll attach it to a barn, and then he let the play shop use it. At the time that the Pilgrim Hall was built in '52, a group of women decided that we should have a room that eventually came to be called the Colonial Room, that would be dedicated to objects that would remind us of early Wilton. And that's how this came about. And the clock, for example, has a history of where it came from. Well, first, the fireplace mantel was done by Justine and Arch Milliken. She was a real important lady in the history of the church, especially the history of the Yankee Fair. Justine Milliken pretty much founded that August fair that was held every year for 50 years or so until probably more like 60, 70 years until it petered out. But the Millikens donated the fireplace mantle. Yeah, this is Ethelhart. Where'd Pam go? You can give that to Pam, or look, pass it around and look at it. It's Ethelhart standing in front of the picture of her grandfather. This is something I didn't mention out front, but in 1986 they had a pretty serious fire on the roof of the church. Remember that one, Bob?
1986, that's recent.
Yeah, that's pretty recent. Well, there were men doing work up there and smoking cigarettes, and one of them threw a cigarette on the wood shingles. Before they knew it, they'd burned a hole in the section of the roof, and the firemen came and passed that around and give it to Pam for the archives.
Does the chandelier have any history?
Probably.
That was in the files.
Did you ever see this picture?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that picture. That's a great picture.
I want to give that one to Pam too.
Once it gets on to color.
Well, you might let people look at it. The New Yorker, this woman, Helen Hokinson, who lived in Wilton, did a large number of covers for the New Yorker.
Yeah, I wanted to fess up.
It's not exactly our church, but everybody got the idea because it was Yankee Fair, yeah. And Helen Hokinson lived in Wilton. She did something like 60 or 70 covers for the New Yorker, starting in the 1920s, shortly after the New Yorker started. And she was very popular, and everybody loved her covers and cartoons. And she died in a plane crash.
Oh, no.
Yeah, in 1949. I want you to see that little organ over there that Pam is standing in front of. I guess it actually played. So, it was discovered in the attic of the original parsonage where Reverend Hart lived. Probably when they were rebuilding a parsonage in the 1970s. And it at one time had foot pedals and actually worked. And sometimes they played that instead of the big pump organ that Ethelhart preferred to play. This came with the Harts when they moved to Wilton. He became minister here in 1889. So. And I suppose these other things have heritage too, but I don't have it all with me. Most every portrait that's hanging, like portraits in the church, has a history behind it, different people. Of course, Reverend Bednar was minister here for a long time.
This is John Smith. He was minister 1839 to 1848.
Yeah, I remember that.
Formidable.
Doesn't it?
This is you can come over and look at it. This is a copy of the petition that residents in 1726 submitted to the colonial legislature. Petition to establish Wilton Parish as part of Norwalk. So we were still part of the city of Norwalk, but we became a parish of our own, had our own ministry, and could raise money to support the activities within our parish, which worked fine for almost 75 years. But in 1801, New Canaan successfully petitioned the state government, we were a state by then, to form a separate town. New Canaan had been part of Stamford, part of Norwalk, and so they chipped a piece off of those two and formed New Canaan. So Wilton residents said, well, if they can do it, we can too. So they submitted a petition in 1802 to become a separate town of Wilton. And by then, this church had been in existence since 1790, and we were firmly established. And as I mentioned earlier, the town meetings were held here for several years until the state constitution was one of the first states to separate church and state and require people to have a separate town hall for public business. We're not going to bother opening
Okay,
it.
okay. Here, let me move this some close.
I just want to tell people, sorry, I just want to tell people the story. Gotta get close enough to see this thing. Many years ago, like about 1900, 1910, the state of Connecticut asked local towns if they wanted to preserve their early records, they could send them up to the state library. And Wilton Congregational Church says, no thanks, we'll take care of them ourselves. So they were stored in an old safe, not this one, an old safe that sat for many years in the corner of the church office. And then finally in the early, I guess the late 1960s, the office and the leaders of the church says, we got to get rid of that old safe. So they shipped it off to somebody's barn. And then he was going to throw it out, but he said, I can't throw it out without looking into it. So he got a metal torch, cut through the metal part, knocked out the concrete, found the original records of Wilton Church back to 1726 inside this old safe. Nobody had known they were there. And so it made the headlines in 1973. The picture of Dottie Wilson, who used to be our church secretary, and Mrs. Price looking at some of the old records and how wonderful it was they had discovered this. So then they were stored in a vault in one of the local banks for a while, until finally the local bank was kind of not very generous, and it cost too much to keep them in the local bank vault, and so we got this safe. And I can't tell you the exact year, but we still have the old records back to 1726. So if this building ever burns down, you'll find them in here safe, in the safe.
Is there a lock on that
It's a combination lock.
combination? Who has a combination?
I used to have it, Pam has it. I haven't looked at it for a long time, but the stuff is still in there. And it's not only I should also mention the early records from 1726 to 1800 have been photocopied. It was before the days of microfilm. It was done in the 1930s. Photocopied, and those copies are in the Wilton Library. So if you're looking for really old records, 1726 to 1800, that's in the Wilton Library. The difficulty is everything after 1800 is probably in here. Or you can, with luck, find things in the town hall. But town hall did not record births and marriages until the 1850s or 60s, so there's a gap there. Anyhow, it's important stuff in there.
Here, there's the mirror, the window.
Oh yeah, some of the same pipes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I will put this here, if anybody wants to peek in.
That was a classroom before we built Pilgrim Hall. They put the Sunday school kids in all kinds of little spaces.
It's a utility room.
This is the minister's room? I thought it was the furnace room. I think it's the furnace room. It's really the furnace room. I don't know what's in there. It looks like the janitor's room to me. But back in there is the furnace room. The windows, I just mentioned in passing, 20 panes over 20 panes, which is unusual. You don't find many buildings that have that many window panes. 20 over 20 in every one of the windows. And a lot of the glass is still the original. You can see when you wave back and forth, the wavy glass is likely original. Nice weather vane up here, which lasted many years. And Tim Lynch of the Kenneth Lynch Foundry donated the new one that's up there now. And I don't remember the year. We can look it up in the Wilton Bulletin. Do you remember, Bob? I knew I was here when they mounted it. We have a picture of Tim Lynch out front with the new one. And then, of course, instead of climbing the tower, like you saw pictures in there of people climbing the tower, they get a big crane to put it up. But this old one survived a lot. We have a record from 1879. The local newspapers, Ridgefield Press covered Wilton back then. They started in 1875. And they reported in the fall of 1878 that the weather vane on the Congregational Church looks like it's tottering. Next news, April of 1979. The weather vane came down. 3 months later, the weather vane has been remounted. They built a scaffolding all the way up to get there. And a big crowd showed up. I don't think anybody took pictures, which is too bad, but anyhow, the weather vane went up again in '79 and stayed until about 1995, I would guess, that Tim Lynch of Kenneth Lynch Company donated a new one that's up there now.
Bye, Bob. It was great.
One other thing, do you remember when they used to, at Christmas time, get the kids from the band to get up there on the balcony and play the trumpets?
Play the brass.
Play
yes.
the brass?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think just recently I spoke to two different gentlemen that did that.
Yeah.
Hinman.
Yeah.
Hinman's son.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't remember the other fellow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But they were telling me about
That's
the high school
great.
brass would come up
Yeah,
and play
they'd go up there on
Yeah.
Christmas and go out on that balcony and play.
Uh-huh.
Ah. Don't jump. I guess they're going back in.
Hey, Kenny.
Hey. Good.
Stroud, Kenny, and Catherine's husband, Chris.
Oh, Catherine and Chris Strout and,
Yes.
and Kenny
Kenny Mercer.
Mercer, yeah. Good. Somebody's taking pictures.
It's a good view.
Oh,
of
yeah.
Historic District 2.
That's right. We don't often get people up there.
You know, in the spring, I have usually a group of high schoolers that do an internship here.
Yeah.
And they love going up to the steeple, ring the bell, and they're all
Sure.
hanging around that balcony.
Sure, I didn't invite them to ring the bell because
Yeah.
it might hit somebody. Well, you've probably been up there.
I rang it last week.
But have you been on the balcony?
No, I
Because the
haven't.
bell swings back and forth, and if you're trying to go down the
yes,
steps, you'll
yes.
get clunked in the head.
That is true. Well, there's Mike Sella.
I didn't tell the story about how they got that bell.
King of the world.
As chair of building and grounds now, I've got to inspect it all. Should I slide my way up the steeple?
Just don't lean on the railing.
don't lean on the railing. Yeah.
I gave you the picture of that roof fire, didn't I?
Yes.
Yeah, it was right over here. You know, when Walt Smith reinforced the steeple in 1959, all that metal that you see in the steeple, they had sprinklers going most of the time because they had welding torches up there.
Okay.
And then they were afraid there'd be heat enough left from the welding that it would start a fire, and so they had people guarding it all night long. And for a while the fire department was here watching it, and they got tired and went home. But he made sure it didn't catch fire while they were doing all that welding. And when they did that reinforcement in 1975, I know I was on that committee, Walt Smith was quite upset. He wanted to do it with metal pegs in the old-fashioned way.
Okay.
And they gave the contract to a guy that put a lot of steel up there. And he said that was unnecessary. I could have fixed it.
You could have fixed it.
Could have fixed it.